The questions is how do you track back to what a person really means, in the sense that this is the primary experience that stands for surface structure. What's interesting about sleight of mouth, though, and I think the typical way in which people look at language is they go, surface structure is generated from deep structure. Part of what we're saying is that there's a strange kind of a feedback loop here which says that, well, surface structure also affects deep structure. In fact, I was challenged, and I think quite nicely so and appropriately so, by somebody at the lunch break who said, well, now, Robert, you said that this chair, when we call this a chair, that's reality. And he said, that's not reality. That's still a belief about this. We were saying and I was saying it's quite true. And I want to bring this up for two reasons. One is because I think it relates to the deep structure, surface structure issue. Number two, because I want to encourage and reinforce that kind of thinking and that kind of challenging of presuppositions. Because in a way, the fact that we call this a chair is because we do all agree to categorize this as a particular object called a chair. I mean, we're agreeing that because this thing has these properties, we will decide to categorize it. We will believe that it's a chair and has a certain function. Not everybody will do that. For example, I've noticed that in both the behavior of geniuses and of psychotics, certain things like that are challenged. You might very well indeed find somebody redefining this and saying, no, this isn't a chair, this is a spaceship, and actually believe it. And thus, they get a whole different set of experiences when they sit on this sucker, you know, than you do, you know. I mean, I've seen people like that. So you could redefine this and say, no, this isn't a chair. That's what the whole structure of being a child and pretending is all about. Someone was talking about, there was a young man a couple of years ago when I was in this area, had a lot of problems with math, a lot of problems with fractions. And basically I ended up with a sleight of mouth that because I found out this young fellow could play chess exquisitely and was a wonderful cook and couldn't do fractions. You know, I thought, well, wait a minute, you know the difference between a half a cup and a quarter of a cup, don't you? Yeah, so I said, oh, so see, I don't want you to do fractions. These things are not fractions. They're just number recipes. This is an equation. It's just a recipe of numbers. Now that takes something that is supposedly a real thing in the outside world and it recategorizes it. So this guy went, oh, I see. I mean, all of a sudden, that made it very different. This isn't an equation, a mathematical equation. It's just a recipe in numbers. So again, that kind of thing where you take a fundamental presupposition like this is a chair and challenge it it can make somebody very creative. Now, of course, you have to balance that creativity with rapport with other people. But certainly that's one of the things that somebody like Albert Einstein did. Albert Einstein said, hey man, everybody has certain presuppositions about what time are. I don't agree with that. Everybody goes, well, of course things happen simultaneously. That's one of the things that Einstein did, is he challenged the whole concept of time because it was based on this presupposition that things can happen, two events can happen simultaneously. And he said, well, that's not really true. Things that we think are simultaneous are not really. So he took this very key, basic, presupposed concept in physics and challenged it and kind of turned around the whole field of physics. So what I want to say is, number one, here, by using, with this child, for example, by using a surface structure, by just going, well, this isn't this, it's that. We used a surface structure that had these incredible ramifications all the way down into a deep structure, which kind of changed the implication.
Okay, so what I meant is when you're challenging this, like you challenged success. One person in our group said, well, looking good is important. Okay, now looking good. Now we didn't challenge looking good, so we had our own idea of what looking good was.
Right.
And so we didn't find out all the information we wanted to. Because later on we found out that looking good to this person was with their overall health and a lot of other things attached to it.
And isn't reality wonderful? This is the essence of all this stuff. We all have these different meanings for all these different things. And what he's saying is, I see that as being the kind of notion of pacing. In some ways, the fact that we have different definitions for looking good can really be valuable because it allows me to, that's what allows me to give this person a different perspective. Quite literally, it's because it means something different to me. I don't get caught in the same deep structure that person does. On the other hand, this is where I think this idea of pacing and leading comes in. Because pacing means that if my definition of this thing is so far away from that person's, if my sight, sounds, feelings that I use to understand that language is so distinct from that other person, I'm now not able to be close enough to their model of the world to pace it so I can lead it on. And on the other hand, if I'm too close to it, and they go, well, you know, if you look good, you have to give up something else, and I go, yeah, you're right. You know, in other words, then I'm too close to it, and I've gotten caught in their whole belief system. So that's the interesting thing, is there's got to be enough distance between your definition and theirs that you can get outside of it so you can move it. But you've also got to share enough. And I think what you're saying is that, in fact, some words are almost too general to be able to start right off with in terms of quote-unquote sleight of mouthing. So, and indeed, when you are working with somebody, whether it's a conversation or whether it's an actual piece of work that you're doing with an individual, you want to make sure that you have enough information, that you're in enough rapport and you can pace them enough that you actually do and share at least some basic images and feelings that they have associated with it. So here's where you get the pacing and leading issue. I'd like to say one last thing about the power of the word, so to speak. What I was intending when I was talking about the difference between this being a chair versus something being an identity, I was really talking about the notion of hierarchies, that if we say if this is a chair or not a chair, for the most part, that's about environment, which is the least impactful, typically, on a personal level. It's the least impactful part of our experience. So the fact that people call this a chair usually doesn't come up as a, people don't argue about it, and whether you call it a chair or you call it, I don't know. Yeah. Bar stool, right. It doesn't really make much difference. We go, so what? Okay, I can change the words. But when it comes down to my identity, if you say, well, Robert, you know, you're a manipulator or you're a charlatan, you know, I mean, one or the other, it doesn't make much difference. Now I got to go, wait a minute, you know, that's those words, you know, now you're talking things that are really important to me. Whether we again call this a chair or not a chair doesn't make that much difference. And that's, now, by the way, and again, in certain situations, that might make quite a difference. And like I said, in the case of a person with psychosis, you know, you start going down, and one of the things that's so interesting about working with folks that are schizophrenic or something is that they don't share some of the real basic level presuppositions that you think everyone else does. You know, everybody talks about this is a good feeling and this is a bad feeling. This is pleasurable and this is painful. Everybody knows what that means. I mean, and that's where it really gets interesting and very, very powerful to work with the belief systems, is on those levels, as well as the general identity levels. Also, in the context of something like art, I was reminded of something like Picasso. You know, you could take a bicycle and say, this is a bicycle seat, and this